And welcome back to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, coming to you live this week on a live streaming episode of the podcast. I'm coming solo as it's a little too late for Justin Lowry. He's got a young tyke to attend to at this hour of the night. Can't be talking wrestling. He's got some big dad duties instead. So we're going without Justin, but certainly here in spirit. Got a lot to get to this week as it was at least presented as a very big episode of Monday Night Raw just a few nights ago with the Raw reunion, basically bringing back some of the biggest names in the history of Monday Night Raw. That carried over into what I thought was a pretty good episode of SmackDown Live. And then within the last 48 hours or so, some announcements regarding the future of All Elite Wrestling's television show. Potentially some news with the NXT programming coming to television screens, as well as a big-time arrest involving a WWE superstar today. So those are all things that I want to get to, but as we mentioned, Raw Reunion was the big story this week. Let's kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it. I kind of have mixed feelings when it comes to Raw Reunion. I looked at it as something that they wanted to do short-term, to try to get some interest back in this show, because when you bring in names like Shawn Michaels and you bring in Stone Cold Steve Austin and you bring in Mick Foley and Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, so on and so forth, so many legendary stars, Hall of Famers, so on and so forth, it has a positive influence in terms of the ratings, and that was reflected. But to what purpose? Because it's a one-off for most of these guys. I don't think that any of them really, for the most part, are going to be going forward in parts of storylines. Now, we'll get to maybe Shawn Michaels, potentially, as well as Mick Foley. But when you look at the Raw reunion, my take is pretty simple. You have a show that more or less is about recognizing the past stars, but not creating interest in the current star. So if a fan who, maybe watched wrestling back in the Attitude Era or even, the early 2000s tunes in, what is going to get them to stick around and watch Raw next week when Stone Cold and all the other legends aren't there? Did they get enough out of this episode to be interested in the current superstars, the current product? My answer would be no. And so here's where it's a problem. You get more eyes on the product. You need to do something to keep those fans around. I thought Raw Reunion failed to do that. And the one segment that I thought maybe could have some long-term influence and a positive impact going forward involved Mick Foley, who was talking about his, favorite moment on Raw, so on and so forth. He gets interrupted. And I think people could tell right away what was going to happen. It was now the person dubbed as The Fiend. It was Bray Wyatt who came out, beat up Foley, and I think in a very interesting twist, gave him the mandible claw. Now, will that become Bray Wyatt's finisher or a trademark move for him going forward? We'll have to wait and see. But it was very fitting and something that, Mick Foley put over a recently returning superstar. It's sort of like a new version of Bray Wyatt, so it's almost like a debut of sorts that happened last week. You build upon it. He takes out this legend, does so with the mandible claw. People who maybe didn't know about this new version of Bray Wyatt, or maybe they haven't watched for years, they don't know Bray Wyatt at all, they now remember Bray Wyatt and this very unique look. So that gets people interested. Oh, I want to see what this Bray Wyatt does next. He seems like an interesting character to me. Job well done. Beyond that, could you think of superstars that really got put over in terms of their interaction with the legends? I would say no, not really. I think they tried to do this with Seth Rollins, and there was some word that came out that Ricochet was supposed to be heavily involved, and then they had to rewrite some stuff because he was not able to be on television for whatever reason. So they sort of threw Seth Rollins in. He was doing a match with AJ Styles, which should be an awesome match, right? except AJ was with Anderson and Gallows, which they're now rebranded the OC. I don't like that at all because they didn't explain like what that meant. Original club, okay, we know it's a reference to like the Bullet Club, which wasn't really the original version with AJ Styles anyway, but that's a different story. So they call him the OC. I didn't really like the name of the club. I don't like the OC either, but whatever. As long as they're booked okay, the name isn't the biggest issue. They're not booked that greatly in this segment because Seth Rollins gets back up from DX. Why? I have no idea. No explanation behind that. And of course, Seth and Triple H have had a pretty checkered past. So we just are supposed to forget that. But then at the end of it, the OC come and grab some chairs, and it looks like they're going to potentially do a number on Seth, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H. When out comes two more members of DX, the 1, 2, 3 Kid, X-Pac, whatever you want to call them, and the Road Dogg, Jesse James, and of course Billy Gunn, because of his affiliation with All Elite, can't be there, and it's actually something they made light of, which was probably one of the better moments of the entire night. And then for whatever reason, as you could see, Kevin Nash is there, Scott Hall was also there. They were representing sort of the NWO, sort of the Clique. It made no sense. It sort of brought back memories to the WrestleMania match between Triple H and Sting, where they all got involved, and it was just a cluster. And then they have Seth like doing like we got 2 words for you, and it came across as so forced and made Seth less cool. And I feel like this is the problem that WWE has. How do we get this face over? Oh, we put him against the Authority, or we have him do some shtick with DX. It doesn't work. Seth Rollins out there with a bunch of late 40s, early 50s, even later 50-year-olds, and, trying to do their catchphrases from 20 years ago like it's going to make Seth cool now. It didn't. To me, this is just a downward spiral for Seth Rollins in terms of his face reaction, in terms of his character. And I think he's going to become the new Roman Reigns if they don't change it eventually, where fans are supposed to cheer from him and they're just not going to get behind this guy. That was bad. I really didn't like that one bit, and it sort of made this OC, the club, look kind of like wimps again. They backed away from, basically some borderline senior citizens. So that was a failure in my mind. The show, I think the start and finish were notable, and they were decent segments, but it still kind of is the same thing. So we'll begin with the beginning, and it's John Cena. And John Cena is different because John Cena is a guy who can still go. John Cena is, maybe not in his prime per se, but a guy who can still be there on a regular basis, still have big-time storylines, make a major impact. He's a guy that could wrestle, and main event any pay-per-view at any time of year, including WrestleMania, if they decide to go that route with him. So they throw him with the Usos. They have Cena come out and do like a very generic, like, thank you, Raw has meant so much to me. Well, then the Usos interrupt him, and they say, hey, John, like, we got some stuff that, we want to get to. Here's what we think is, you need to do the old John Cena rapping. The Doctor of Thugonomics, and Cena's like, oh, I don't think so. And, they call him out, so on and so forth. And then he comes out and he does it, and he raps on the Usos, which, oh my gosh, how ironic is this? He raps about them getting arrested and their mugshots. Well, guess what happens? About 48 hours later, yeah, you guessed it, one of the Usos got arrested. And this is a major faux pas on my part. I think it was Jimmy Uso, but that being said, it gets kind of confusing to track them and their arrest because it's happened multiple times now. Another DUI for Jimmy Uso, which, they make fun of it on Raw. It's a very serious circumstance just a few days later. So we'll see what happens with the Usos. It turns out that, you look back and you say, oh, man, that's really tone deaf that they had Cena making fun of that. Then Rikishi comes out, and they sort of do like a dance thing with Rikishi. John Cena is a guy that WWE desperately needs, and I understand he has other pursuits, but to me, if you're going to have John Cena back for one night, do more than this. Intertwine him with someone, and we saw him in Elias at WrestleMania. Have Elias make a name at John Cena's expense, or someone else that you want to promote, someone else that you're trying to build up, someone new to the scene, instead of like the Usos coming and rapping with him and then Cena. Was it a fun segment? Sure. Does it mean anything at all? Does anyone benefit from it after that episode? No. And that's what I felt about the final segment. And I can't even say main event because it wasn't a main event. It was Stone Cold Steve Austin coming out. First they had Hogan, which he gets a very lukewarm reaction because people know about his issues. Obviously some very racist comments that came out. And Ric Flair, who, Ric Flair is what he is now. I think truthfully a lot of fans are just glad to see that he is still alive at this point. They didn't even really give him like a mic. It's kind of tough for Ric Flair on live TV at this point. So Hogan and Flair kind of just stand there, and then they let Austin come out, and Austin cuts a pretty cool promo. I liked it. Stone Cold looked great physically. He's still very entertaining. He could come out and cut a promo with the best of them. People instantly care. But it felt like, okay, Steve, go out there. You got like 6 minutes. Talk about whatever you want. I wish they would do that for current superstars. They generally don't. Despite some rumors, maybe Kevin Owens gets that leeway, maybe a few other guys. But Austin comes out, and it's like, what's the point of this? He talked about, the family, the fraternity of wrestlers, and even their relationship with the fans. I have no complaints about, it was an interesting promo that people, I think enjoyed. But long term, it's just, it accomplished nothing. And I was just waiting, like, someone's going to attack Austin, or someone's going to jump in and ruin this, right? Well, it never happened. And it just went off the air with Stone Cold and everyone drinking beers and stuff. Like, when you're leading up to SummerSlam, and we're just like, 3 weeks away from SummerSlam, and you're trying to make this big time event, especially with competition brewing and AEW set to have their biggest show and then go to cable television, you need to have a killer build to SummerSlam. You need to have a killer show at SummerSlam. And, like, this is just a complete waste of an opportunity. Like, there was so much that could have been done to put over younger talent, to build towards something interesting, and it didn't happen. I have no reason to believe that people that tuned in just for the Raw reunion, that don't watch on a regular basis, will now continue watching Monday Night Raw. I don't think it's going to happen, and that's a problem. To me, I will think of this as like, was it better than other reunion shows? Was it better than, the Raw 1000 and so on and so forth? Here's how I look at it. It didn't facilitate and move along anything into next week and beyond. Other than, like I said, Bray Wyatt, yeah, you give that segment props. They had some legends winning the 24/7 title. That was just kind of a running comedy thing throughout the night. They had other guys involved with Sami Zayn, so on and so forth. I wanted an impact moment, and I think with maybe just one exception, I did not get that on Raw. So to me, thumbs down for the Raw reunion. Yeah, it was fun for one night, but it's not going to build new stars. What's Vince McMahon going to do in, 10 years from now? He's going to bring out people that never really got to superstar level. He's going to bring out, okay, here's Drake Maverick, and here's Cedric Alexander and Drew McIntyre. Like, you can't, that doesn't seem like it's going to happen, right? Who are you going to bring out? You're not going to bring out the current stars because they're not larger than life, like a Steve Austin or a Hulk Hogan or a Ric Flair, or really even like a Mick Foley or Shawn Michaels or Triple H are. It just seems like they need to focus more on building stars. And if you use a legend creatively to do that, good. But it didn't happen. So, not a very productive show in my estimation. You jump over to SmackDown, and I think you get a heck of a lot more. Let's begin with the WWE Championship storyline. It's Kofi Kingston and Randy Orton. There's a lot of good that I think can come from this storyline because it makes sense for this to be a story, doesn't it? I mean, you look at it and it's Kofi Kingston against the guy who like ruined his initial push almost 10 years ago. And guess what? They referenced it. Randy Orton talked about it. Kofi and Kingston talked about it. Is there real life heat between the two? Probably not anymore, I don't think. Maybe there is. But the fact that they brought it up, that's what you need. Because the fans who were there and know about this backstory, oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere. If there's real life heat, or even if there's just a connection, a previous storyline, some history, use that to the benefit. As long as you're not crossing the line, which, you don't want to get too personal all the time. But this makes perfect sense to me. Randy Orton, Kofi Kingston. The backstory is Kofi was supposed to be getting a major push. Randy Orton, for whatever reason, did not approve of that. I think he was actually mad that Kofi messed up a move during a match that could have injured Randy Orton, because I know Orton had some collarbone issues and shoulder issues. And I think he said, no, we're not doing this. Kofi's, reckless or not ready or whatever the story was. And Kofi never got that big push. And it took him basically 10 years to get that second opportunity. This time he capitalized, won the championship at WrestleMania. He's carried the title somewhat surprisingly since then. And now it's him and Randy Orton. And it felt like there was a lot of reality behind this promo. And they've gotten to the point now where Kofi isn't just like a comedic character. While the New Day still is together and they have their moments, and especially Woods and Big E are comedic, Kofi's become more serious because that's what you have to be. That's it's just when you're the WWE champion or the Universal champion or whatever, that's kind of goes with the territory. Kofi's done that. And to me, the last two feuds with Samoa Joe and now with Randy Orton, those are very serious opponents, way more than Kevin Owens and Dolph Ziggler. So I think this works for Kofi. I think it works for Randy Orton. It makes him significant, gives him something, that really could bring out the best in him, because Randy Orton, I think, when motivated, is as good as there is in WWE. When he's kind of coasting, which has happened, he is what he is at this point. So I like this storyline. I like what they did on SmackDown. I'm looking forward to the match. I think Kofi should probably retain against Randy Orton, and then that leads into maybe a new champion when we get towards Fox. But, you look at this, and they're doing a lot right. And I think you see SmackDown as a much better show in terms of what we're going to be getting heading into SummerSlam. But, there's still time. So that storyline really was a home run for me. We'll see what they do from here on out, how they continue to build it, but I like what I've seen. Pretty clear that they're, heading for a big match at SummerSlam. They've had an idea how to build it and have gone forward with it. Something that's not quite as clear, but I think is very interesting nonetheless, is the interaction between Dolph Ziggler, The Miz, and Shawn Michaels that we saw. So they had Michaels kind of stick around for, the Legends Week, if you will, after he was on the Raw reunion. He came back on SmackDown. He was a guest on Miz TV, and then Dolph Ziggler interrupted. Ziggler and Miz have kind of been having this feud, mini feud, I guess you could say. Well, Ziggler for years and years has had the Shawn Michaels comparisons. I don't think Ziggler's done anything to run from that or dismiss that. He's done a lot of stuff that is reminiscent of Shawn Michaels with his look, sort of, some of the characteristics of his character. So it's fitting that Michaels and Ziggler had interaction, but it got physical. As you could see in that photo, Ziggler lays out Shawn Michaels. Where does this go? Does it lead to Shawn Michaels and Dolph Ziggler? Does it lead to The Miz and Dolph Ziggler, or Shawn Michaels just kind of being there to, maybe generate some interest in this story? I don't know, but to me, you're not going to get Shawn Michaels coming out of what's basically retirement to go against Dolph Ziggler at SummerSlam, because Ziggler just isn't a big enough name. It wouldn't be a big enough match. Do you do Miz and Ziggler? Okay, well, that's fine, but that doesn't seem like it's really going to register with most fans. I mean, The Miz has kind of floundered as a face. Dolph Ziggler, while I think he's actually been very good during this comeback, he doesn't win. He lost a feud with Kofi. Why would we care about The Miz and Ziggler? No titles on the line. These guys are very mid-card at this point. So where does it go? Well, the report is Ziggler will be wrestling at SummerSlam. It won't be against Shawn Michaels. It won't be against The Miz. So if that is accurate, and of course, you know, the phrase is plans change. And I know firsthand plans do change at the last minute. But if that is true, who could Dolph Ziggler be facing? The name that has come up is Goldberg. Because Ziggler has thrown shots at Goldberg, then he takes out a legend in Shawn Michaels. Could you see that happening? It makes more sense than Shawn Michaels versus Ziggler, I think. You give Goldberg a squash victory for him to redeem, you know, that bad showing against The Undertaker. They had The Undertaker come back, and he gets the victory in the tag match with Roman. He looked very motivated, very good. Maybe they want to afford that same luxury to Goldberg. Hey, we'll get you out there again. You beat Ziggler in like 3 minutes. He'll look good for you. Flop around. You come out, you know, feeling a little bit better about yourself. You don't have to leave on a low note. Does it happen? We'll see. I would still put money on Ziggler versus Miz more than anything else. But at least there's some interest involving Dolph Ziggler now and where this storyline goes after he super kicked Shawn Michaels on SmackDown. Another thing on SmackDown, it wasn't particularly clear who Charlotte is going to be facing. She said she's going to have a match at SummerSlam. It's going to be bigger than the women's title matches. You know, speculation, and I think you could pencil in with the match taking place in Toronto for SummerSlam, Trish Stratus. Makes a lot of sense to me. I think it will happen. Now, how do you book it? Charlotte has to win, right? Okay, as long as Trish is competitive, not a big deal. But for the people who are like kind of happy that Charlotte's been on the back burner for the time being after her being shoved down our throats for like basically nonstop for 3 or 4 years, will that match overshadow the Raw and SmackDown women's title matches? And if it does, what does that say about your champions? What does that say about your titles? That would be my concern. Bayley versus Ember Moon, fresh matchup, nice new opportunity for Ember, could be a good match. People want to see new challengers. That's great. Becky Lynch, you know, she's really, you know, taken a step back, but I don't think it's necessarily her fault. I think it's just the storylines. Her against Natty doesn't feel like a big match. They're trying to get, you know, trying to generate some interest behind that with some promos and stuff, and they did that on Raw as well. Trish versus Charlotte really might be the biggest match of the women's matches if that happens at SummerSlam. So that's a little bit of a concern, but you also want to have the best card possible for the second biggest show. If they think that's a recipe for it, I think the Toronto fans would love it. We'll see how it continues, but it looks like Charlotte will be going against a legend. Now, Charlotte is one of the few people who doesn't need to get a victory over a legend to help her stock. Would a legend be better used to put over someone that really needs it? For instance, an Ember Moon? Yes. So, you know, is it perfect booking? No. But again, they want to, you know, make SummerSlam a big-time show. Adding Trish Stratus, adding Charlotte will do that. Looks like we're headed that direction after the promo that Charlotte had on SmackDown that really indicated that that's what it's going to be. So I mentioned that there was also some news in terms of updates with television for All Elite Wrestling and for NXT. And I do want to open up for anyone that wants to chime in. They can use the chat right now. I'll get to any questions that we have for this live stream. But let's talk about the word that came out this week. And I wish that Justin Lowry is here because he's really up on this stuff, and I would love to get his take. But it looks like it's set in stone. All Elite Wrestling will have a show Wednesday nights, 2 hours. Probably best for All Elite to stay out of the Tuesday, Thursday realm where the NBA is so big for TNT that you probably get preempted a lot, so on and so forth. Wednesday night seems like it works better. 2 hours. I don't think an hour would be enough. 2 hours, can you fill that every week? It's going to be tough. It'll be a challenge, no doubt, for All Elite. Now, everyone agrees 3 hours for Raw is too much, 2 hours for SmackDown probably is a sweet spot, but I feel like after watching SmackDown for 2 hours, there's still a lot of superstars not being used. Does 2 hours maybe work better for a roster the size of All Elite? Probably. But you're going to have some people that are going to be in prime slots getting a lot of TV time that maybe have never been on major television before. That's going to be, a feeling out process, so on and so forth. But I think ultimately you have to be happy if you're a fan of All Elite Wrestling. 2 hours on TNT on a Wednesday night. But it's not going to be uncontested, it appears, that we always have had NXT on Wednesday nights on the WWE Network. And I'll be honest, I don't watch it live. There's very little motivation to watch it live because you can catch it on demand. But it looks as though NXT will be going to cable television, to FS1, and will be on Wednesday nights at the same time, at least for one of the hours of the All Elite Wrestling television show. So pretty much head-to-head, NXT, which many people think is the most entertaining brand under the WWE umbrella. Will NXT stay 1 hour? Will it stay the same as what you see right now on the WWE Network? Well, it won't be exactly the same because they're going to have to factor in commercials. And right now, the way that it's on the network, it's almost an hour-long show with very minimal interruptions. They run like maybe a 30-second ad in between segments. But during matches, you go pretty much the whole way through. You could have a 15-minute match uninterrupted. They're going to have to trim out probably a segment to work in all the TV breaks and whatnot. But I hope everything else stays the same. You don't want to mess with what's working perfectly. NXT, the takeovers are incredible, but I think the weekly television is pretty good. And one thing that should be noted is they allow young superstars to kind of experiment and find out what works. And sometimes you'll have a segment that's a dud, and you learn from it. Well, now that it's going to be on TV and going against competition, will they maybe be a little bit more hesitant to put like unproven superstars? Will they kind of stick with the guys that are certainly established, guys like Adam Cole and Velveteen Dream and people like that, as opposed to a Kona Reeves or some of the younger women like Aaliyah that they have on that, okay, Aaliyah probably isn't as polished as what you would need to be on weekly WWE television. So it makes sense for her to get opportunities on NXT TV when it's on the network. Will it change when it goes to cable television? And will the WWE Network subscriptions suffer because now people don't need to have the network to watch NXT? I don't think it's going to be a big deal because there's so much else on the network, plus the takeover shows. That's what fans really want to see for NXT. People like Justin Lowry will say, yeah, I try to catch the weekly television, but it's the takeovers that I always watch. I'm not going to give up the WWE Network because I need to watch takeovers. And word came out today that there's going to be maybe some different tiers to the network. There's going to be a free tier. There's going to be maybe an additional, more costly tier going forward where you have stuff like the Evolve show more regularly. So that'll all be interesting to see how that plays out. How All Elite Wrestling show will do with 2 hours on Wednesdays. How NXT will do in terms of the ratings. I think a lot of people know how good NXT is. I think that show is going to do pretty well. But it's going to force wrestling fans to make a decision. Do they watch All Elite Wrestling? Do they watch NXT? Will you be able to watch NXT on the network afterwards, sort of on demand, where that it's not as important that you watch it live? These are questions that maybe some of the answers already are out there, but I think it'll be curious to see how it unfolds in just a couple months' time, because it's supposed to really go into effect in October, all of this head-to-head. Fox becomes the new home of SmackDown, and then FS1 for NXT, and I think there's going to be an hour-long WWE talk show. They'll run back-to-back, it appears, on Wednesday to counter All Elite Wrestling that will start on TNT at that time. So there's a lot of good stuff upcoming in the world of professional wrestling, and we're going to get some real head-to-head competition just in a few months' time. I want to leave on a weekly segment that we've been having. Justin and I have given suggestions on ways that WWE can improve its product right now. Quick, simple solutions to make it a better product, both short-term and long-term. And this week I want to talk about giving time off, planned time off, to each and every superstar on the roster every year. And I'll give maybe some ideas, but the specifics, that needs to be worked out within the company. I think basically for 9 months of the year, more or less, superstars need to have the opportunity, and really not just the opportunity, but they need to basically be committed to getting time off, vacation time, if you will, so that they don't get worn out, so that fans don't get sick of seeing them each and every week throughout the entire 12 months of the year. So I would propose this. From the Royal Rumble through WrestleMania, blackout. No one gets time off unless, obviously, you're injured. Then there's nothing you can do about it. But from, April, the second week of April, we'll say, up until, early to mid-January, you should have superstars kind of plan out their vacations or their time off. You get 3 weeks or 4 weeks off at a time, maybe 6 total weeks, potentially up to 8 total weeks for superstars, although I think 6 weeks probably is a little bit more in line with what you'd expect. And you build it into the storylines. Hey, Randy Orton, for instance, he's going to be off the first 3 weeks of September and then the last 3 weeks of December. Okay, so we have to, if we're going to have him in a storyline, can we still facilitate that by having him do vignettes or video packages? Or if not, okay, we'll just have him off TV for those 3 weeks. Fans aren't going to be devastated by going 3 or 4 weeks without seeing him. And again, I'm just using him as an example, but it gives him time to recharge the batteries. Then when he comes back, okay, well, we haven't seen him for a month. Maybe it's a little bit more interesting than if we see this guy each and every week. And the benefits to, the programming and being a little bit more creative and fans getting a break from the superstars is great. But the bigger impact is what it's going to do for the superstars. They're going to be healthier. They're going to be happier. They're going to have those recharged batteries. They're going to probably have some time to get back in the gym, to heal up, to be healthy, to be, really just fresh. And I think that's a key because these guys work basically, if they're healthy, 12 months a year. Yes, they get 2-3 days off every week. Some weeks they get even more days off. But they also have weeks where they're working and traveling all 7 days, especially when they go on European tours and over in Asia, Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. They're just exhausted. And they're not at their best after a trip like that. They come back, they go straight to a Raw or SmackDown taping. They're not going to be as good as if they've been well rested. So I think you need to rotate, like have maybe 10 superstars between Raw and SmackDown get time off in April, and then 10 more in May. And so that you space it out, so you don't have all your big names gone at the same time, because then you're really going to see that hurt programming. But I think you space it out, everyone's happy, everyone's healthy, the fans get a break, it benefits everyone. That is something that I would like to see WWE institute, and I think it would have great long-term as well as short-term effects on the product. That's pretty much going to do it for this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I want to remind you once again that you could follow us on Twitter, 5-Star Pod Wrestle. You can check out our Instagram, 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn on notifications so that when we do live shows like this, you can find out about it, join in the conversation, throw some questions along in the process. But for now, that's going to do it for another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. We'll catch you again here next week.